When Charles II of Spain died in 1700 without any heirs, not even a female one, this caused a succession crisis in Spain, with two candidates for the Spanish throne being proposed. Louis XIV's grandson, Philippe, Duke of Anjou, supported by France in these countries, and Archduke Charles of Austria, supported by Austria in these countries. Historically, Philip did become King of Spain, but had to abandon his place in the French succession. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, Louis XIV campaigned for his nephew, Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, to become King of Spain instead of Philip? Well, that's what we're going to explore today in this alternate history scenario. Well, this is very hard to do because we have very little historical evidence that Louis XIV had any intention of putting his nephew on the Spanish throne over his very own grandson. So take the rest of the video with a very microscopic grain of salt. But we could say that due to great power pressure, that he's forced to campaign for his nephew to become the Spanish king instead of Philip. Assuming that everything else goes the same way in the War of the Spanish Succession, Philippe of Orléans will become King of Spain. This will lead to weaker but still strong Franco-Spanish relationships due to the two countries not being ruled by the same royal family. Fast forwarding to 1789, assuming that everything else goes in the same direction, the French Revolution will most likely go the same way, except Louis Philippe II of Orléans was historically executed by the guillotine in 1789. But in this timeline, due to being the King of Spain, he wouldn't directly face the wrath of the French Revolution, which would lead to Louis Philippe to live longer and might even be one of the first countries to join the coalition against revolutionary France to avenge his cousin's loss, which would be Louis XVI of France. This will probably lead to higher morale in Spain to get revenge for the execution of Louis XVI, which will later result in stronger resistance against Napoleon and his forces in Iberia, which will result in an earlier Napoleonic defeat. Due to the stronger competency of the Spanish, they would most likely have more power in the Congress of Vienna, and maybe even gaining Naples as a reward for participating. This wouldn't change too much until July 22nd, 1830, when the July Revolution starts. Unlike the last French Revolution, the people weren't tired of the monarchy as a whole, they were just tired of the Bourbon one. In our timeline, they put the more liberal Louis Philippe III, Duke of Orléans, on the French throne, being crowned Louis Philippe I of France. This is when I pose two scenarios for this alternate timeline. The first one being, they just put a random Orleans on the throne. The only living sibling of Louis Philippe at the time was, however the hell you pronounce this, who would become the Queen of France. I consider this to be very unlikely because at the time, woman couldn't become the Queen of France no matter what. So that's when the second and more interesting scenario comes in. Louis Philippe becomes King of France. Why I think this is the more interesting one is because, again, depending on when Louis Philippe II of Spain dies in this alternate timeline, we could see his only living son become both King of France and King of Spain. This would cause fear all across Europe that this will cause both France and Spain to become the most powerful countries in Europe. So as a compromise, this union will have to be just a personal union and not a single official state. And that this union will have to be heavily decentralized in order for this to be acceptable across the great powers. Now we move on to the 1848 revolutions, where the July monarchy was deposed and replaced with the Second Republic. That's when three scenarios come in this alternate timeline. The first one is that only the French half of this union becomes a republic. The second scenario is only the Spanish half becomes a republic. And the third option being that both halves become a republic. I'll go with the third one because it will lead to a more interesting outcome. This will lead to the creation of a Franco-Spanish Republic under Louis Napoleon as president, who would have zero intentions of becoming Emperor of France. Why would you think that? That's just plain silly. The other great powers wouldn't really be able to do anything about it due to them being weakened by the 1848 revolutions. In this alternate timeline in 1852, Louis Napoleon would want to be just like his uncle, Napoleon Bonaparte, and achieve continental dominance all across Europe. In controlling this Franco-Spanish Republic, he would have greater success on creating a Napoleonic Europe. or so he thought. This would be a breaking point in the rest of Europe, with nations like Britain, Prussia, Austria, Sardinia, and Portugal declaring war on the Franco-Spanish Empire. Due to fighting Portugal in the west, Prussia in the east, and the UK in the north, the Franco-Spanish Empire will be forced to surrender to the coalition. In the peace terms, depending on how bad the Franco-Spanish Empire loses, Portugal will gain Galicia, Brittany will gain independence, but under British protection. Corsica will be ceded to Sardinia, and both France and Spain will be separated, with Spain being under Isabella, Princess of Austria's, who was historically the Queen of Spain, and France being under another Republican government. This time I cooked up right here has lead to a weaker France and Spain and a stronger Sardinia and Portugal. I hope you enjoyed my first alternate history scenario that isn't just a mapping video. I will be making more of these videos in the near future, so make sure to subscribe if you want to see them. This is Awesome History, and adios, amigos!